Over 1 million people around the world follow Wall Street veteran Mark Chaikin for his shockingly accurate stock market predictions, and he just gave them a dire warning. Mark says we're about to witness a historic stock market shakeup that could soon create devastating losses for investors who don't know what's coming. And as a result, you only have 90 days to move your money. You see, Mark spent 50 years on Wall Street at some of the most prestigious hedge funds in history, and he's been on Fox Business and CNBC countless times. But this is a financial story no one else is telling. And if you let this take you by surprise, you could be in for a world of pain. He explains everything in a brand new free report available at rollingcrash.com. He includes the name and ticker of a popular stock that could be directly impacted by what's happening as well. Mark warned of beloved pet brand Chewy before it fell 45%, tech company C Limited before it fell 66%, furniture company Wayfair before it fell 76%, social media favorite Snap before it fell 36%, and food delivery company DoorDash before it fell 65%. Mark even called the Amazon crash before the famous FANG stock fell 35%. So you'll want to avoid the stock in his new report immediately. Again, simply go to rollingcrash.com for your free copy of this new report. This is Daniela Cambone, and welcome back to the summer series. I am smiling ear to ear because the great Doug Casey, longtime friend of mine, is back on the show. Doug, always good to have you on. Thank you for joining us for this roundup of our all-stars on our summer series.
Well, it is a pleasure to be here with you. I wish it was in person, but thank God we have Zoom, or this is Riverside, actually. So.
Riverside. Don't tell our trade secrets. But yes, hopefully in person soon, Doug. How's your summer going thus far?
Well, I'm not very psychosomatic, so not terribly influenced by the weather, but the weather's been beautiful and no complaints. Listen, so far we've dodged the bullet with World War III, so everything's still pretty mellow. Yeah, everything's fine.
Well, I thought I'd start our discussion today because I have no idea where it's going to go. I know a little bit, but with you, it's just, you never know what we're going to get. It's always something good. But I thought I'd start with this quote from Robert Kennedy Jr., who, as you know, is running in the presidential election. He says, Doug, there is no time in history where the people who were censoring speech were the good guys. Do you agree with this statement?
He's totally and absolutely right. And just for a brief moment to speak about Robert Kennedy, the only bad thing about him is that he's still a member of the Democratic Party. And as many things as he says that I really like. He wants to disengage the U.S. from the war in the Ukraine. He wants to get rid of many, or calm down many of these Praetorian agencies. He's very suspicious of the whole COVID hysteria and the vaccine hysteria that came after it. A lot of things I like about Robert Kennedy. The main problem with him is that he still identifies, a word they use all today, as a Democrat. And if you're swimming in a cesspool, you got to ask yourself, why doesn't he get out of that cesspool and go someplace else, anyplace else? So as far as freedom of speech is concerned, that's one of the things I really do like about him. The U.S. Constitution, which, forget about the Constitution itself, okay? It's basically just a plan for how you run the government, that the vice president breaks tie votes in the Senate, and operating rules like that, which are trivial and fairly arbitrary and meaningless. It's the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution that really are the heart of the matter. And in the very first amendment, it says, and basically, the Bill of Rights tells what the government cannot do. Not what it should do, but what it cannot do. And first on the list is freedom of speech shall not be infringed. End of story. Mm-hmm. And that is out of control at this point. So I'm 100% in back of Bobby, who seems to be, at the moment, actually the only decent human being running for president that I can think of. Maybe there's somebody I'm forgetting, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, you should be able to say anything that you want to, including hate speech, I've got to say. So-called hate speech, which is a new term. And why do I approve of hate speech? Because I like to know what's on other people's minds. And if they say things, it's by saying things that you can figure out who it is you're dealing with. So rather than them not say things and keep it under cover so you don't know who you're dealing with, I'm even for hate speech. So that's probably more of an answer than you were looking
No,
for.
I mean, that's a whole other conversation because, the pushback to that is obvious, Doug, that, folks will say to you, but Doug, but hate speech riles up people. It can create violence. People will get killed.
Yeah, well, anything can happen. From an asteroid hitting the planet tomorrow morning to there's all kinds of things that can happen. But you've got to deal with first principles. You've got to deal with matters of right and wrong. And sometimes people say things that are foolish or potentially dangerous or in bad taste, which is what it is for many examples of so-called prohibited speech. But none of these things should be prohibited because it's not only a question of it helps you to identify the nature of the person that's saying things, but the way people react to these things helps you figure out who they are, what's on the minds of the people that react to these unpleasant things that people say that they want to prohibit. So it's a good thing from absolutely every point of view. I mean, if we can't communicate with each other in any and every way, we're really no better than herd animals at that point.
Let me ask you this on the topic of Robert Kennedy Jr. I mean, he just came out saying that he would love to back the US dollar with Bitcoin and gold.
That's another thing I like about Bobby, that he broached that topic, that he likes the idea. I mean, there's every indication that, contrary to most of the Kennedy clan and all of the Democrat Party, he's a thoughtful and knowledgeable and decent human being. Now, if he's elected, I may wind up eating my words with a fork and spoon because, frankly, I don't believe in any politicians or a political way of relating with other human beings, quite frankly. But sure, that would solve a major problem that we have because right now, the dollar is a floating abstraction. And the US government and the Federal Reserve, between them, can create unlimited numbers of them, and they are in process of doing that. And if they destroy the dollar, it's going to actually, it's probably the biggest single thing that they can do to actually destroy civilization in the US, starting with the people on the bottom of society who they say they want to help most. Because the only way somebody can elevate themselves is by producing more than they consume and saving the difference. That's the way you build capital and become wealthy or prosperous. But if they inflate the dollar away, then the little people that try to save money, that don't have sophistication to invest, they're going to get hurt worst. And gold or Bitcoin, and I think Bitcoin actually is a sound form of money. I was a slow adopter of Bitcoin. I didn't get into it until 2017, but both of them, the supplies of gold and Bitcoin are very, very limited, and limited by reality, not by political fiat. So that yeah, sure, backing the dollar with these things would be a great idea. But wait a minute. Why do you have to back the dollar with something? Why don't we just use Bitcoin itself or gold itself and cut out the middleman, frankly.
Very good point. Why? Well, let me back it up. Hold that thought. When you say if they destroy the dollar, are you talking the Fed?
Yes. Look, the Fed was created in 1913, and it shouldn't have been created. It was unnecessary to have been created. But when it was created, the basic idea was to act as a clearinghouse for banks in the U.S. to adjust them over temporary bumps in the road where mistakes are made. But since then, it's risen to the point where it controls everything that happens in the U.S. The U.S. government is running trillion-dollar plus deficits every year. The Chinese aren't buying that extra debt. Japanese, nobody's buying it. The Federal Reserve is buying all that debt that the U.S. government is issuing and floating the money into society at large, debasing the currency. So, look, the Fed should be abolished. It shouldn't be reformed. It should be abolished, quite frankly. And fractional reserve banking would be abolished with it. I mean, the whole system should be reformed from top to bottom. But people don't talk about anything as radical as that.
No. And radical would be just eliminating the middleman, as you say, and just having Bitcoin or gold. I mean, that path is so far away from the reality. I mean, that just sounds like something out of a science fiction novel.
Listen, most of the guests that you have here, when you talk about economics, they say, well, I think the Fed should raise the prime rate by 1/4 of a point. And somebody else will say, no, they're going to reduce it by 1/2 a point. This is rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. It's ridiculous and it's stupid, and it confirms the reality of their existence. They shouldn't have any control over interest rates. The market, the buying and selling, lending and borrowing of capital in the open market is what should control interest rates. It shouldn't be some Keynesian educated, arbitrarily appointed people on various Federal Reserve boards, and people that try to second guess what they do and think they can succeed at it impress me as idiots. Well, if not idiots, at least fools.
It's been a while since we last spoke, Doug. So now we have the Fed Now payment system. It's officially launched. We were waiting for it for months. And of course, it's not a central bank digital currency, many would argue. It's the first step towards one. I remember a few months back when you were on, I had asked you which country you think would have been the first to launch a central bank digital currency. Do you remember your answer? Or has it changed, actually?
No, what did I say at the time?
Denmark, I
believe. I hope I said the right thing. Tell me.
A Scandinavian country, I believe, was your answer.
Was it Sweden that did that,
or something like that? Yeah. But let me ask you this. Now we have Putin just signing a bill to usher in, or at least pave the road for a central bank digital currency in Russia. I mean, is there almost a race forming of who will be the first? I mean, there are countries already that have one, but I mean, nations, as people would say, that really matter in the world economic sphere of things.
Well, central banks are a bad idea, and for central banks to have digital currencies that people are going to use is a bad idea on steroids. And the problem with it is that it's going to take a huge amount of agency from individuals. Right now, it's bad enough if you have dollars in a bank. The U.S. government, by going through the courts and so forth, can seal off your brokerage and bank accounts. Okay, but it's still illegal. But with a central bank digital currency, they're not only able to easily create more of them, just by the punch of a computer button, but seal off your bank account, as the Canadian government did to the truckers a couple of years ago, if they're considered to be bad actors. So this is devolving huge extra power to the state. And I'm afraid that the average Westerner will say, oh, this is a good idea. They all have smartphones at this point, and they'll say, wow, this is great. I won't have to take a wallet or a credit card with me. I can just use my iPhone to buy and sell. And sure, it's easy, but they're trading what little agency and financial freedom they have left and giving it away to the government, which, as far as I'm concerned, the state is a force for evil in society. It's pure coercion. And I think there's two ways that you can run society: with voluntarism being emphasized or with coercion being emphasized. And increasingly, the government, which is pure congealed coercion, is being emphasized and more important. So society is going in the wrong direction, frankly.
Are you optimistic that folks will rise up against central bank digital currencies, that there will be a rebellion?
No, I don't think so. Look, they say 20 or 25% of the U.S. population is on psychoactive drugs to start with. I'm not talking about fun drugs like marijuana and cocaine. I'm talking about psychiatric drugs to make them, in effect, zombies. So they're kind of out of the game. Most of the U.S. population has been educated for generations by a totally corrupt school system, which has just overwhelmed them with all kinds of woke and socialist and neo-Marxist ideas, where they think things that are actually wrong are beneficial and right. So no, people, and it'll look so convenient. So no, there's no hope that that's going to happen. That having been said, anybody who thinks for themselves and understands economics and history should have a significant amount of gold and silver coins in their own possession, and a significant amount of Bitcoin, because I think that Bitcoin has proven itself to be a viable currency.
Wow.
And
yeah.
I'm on the Bitcoin side of the equation. I think that it's going to go much higher, and I wish Nayib Bukele, who is the president of El Salvador, all the best, with his having made Bitcoin legal tender in El Salvador. He's done many other good things in El Salvador. I mean, with a little bit of luck, he's turned it from absolutely the worst shithole in the Western Hemisphere, with the exception of Haiti, I've got to say. He's turning it around to the extent that perhaps he'll transform it into a new Hong Kong or Singapore. And having reformed the monetary system or taken steps in that direction is an important part of that.
I want to talk with you now about U.S.-China relations, which are deteriorating by the second here, Doug. And a news item that kind of went under the radar of Henry Kissinger's visit with Xi Jinping. What did you make of this, or maybe not, visit of Kissinger? I mean, he's 100 years old and traveling to China for fun?
Well, he may be 100 years old, but he's also about 100 times smarter and more competent than Joe Biden, or for that matter, anybody in Biden's cabinet. They're all clowns. It's not to say I approve of Kissinger. I mean, you might recall that at the beginning of the war in the Ukraine, Kissinger came out and said, this is a bad idea and we shouldn't get involved. Well, he's changed his tune now, and he's always been part of the war party. But he has a knowledge of history, and he's got a knowledge of the way the world works. So maybe he can put some oil on the troubled waters there. But The chances of World War III are growing almost daily. And if it doesn't start by provoking the Russians further on the east side of the U.S., it'll be by provoking the Chinese on the west. I hate to say this, but the U.S. has transformed itself from a nation that everybody loved, a nation of hamburgers and Beach Boys and California girls and convertible cars and rock and roll music and lots of personal freedom. It's transformed itself into the most dangerous and hated country in the world. Now, I hate to say that, but the U.S. today is not the same country that it was 50 years ago or even 10 years ago. People are afraid of it. It's out of control. And it's going to get more out of control because it is out of control. The fact that the U.S. government is, in fact, bankrupt. It has, $34 trillion debt, and that debt is growing radically. Soon, the annual deficit's going to, the deficit is we're already running over $1 trillion a year in interest alone. Spending is out of control, regulations out of control. We have actual Jacobins in charge in Washington, D.C. I'm not talking about, just people that are left-leaning people that have goofy ideas. I'm talking about people that are really pathological, just like the Jacobins in the 1790s, early 1790s in France after the Revolution. This is very serious.
You made me think of Donald Trump's comments that if he were president, the war would be ended in 24 hours. Now, we know, of course, if the U.S. wanted to end the war in 24 hours, they could do so.
Yeah, they could. I think it's criminal that, look, what this war in the Ukraine, it's a border dispute between two shithole countries. That's what it is. And this is in a region of the world where the borders have been flowing for 1,000 years, and people have been coming and going. And it's true what Putin said, that the Ukraine didn't even exist as a country before Lenin created it in 1923. I hate to say who's right or who's wrong in this. I mean, Russia's certainly wrong to have invaded the Ukraine, but the Ukrainians were wrong to have killed, nobody knows, but the number is at least 15 to 20,000 people when the Donbass region seceded from the Ukraine for lots of good reasons. So, look, this thing would come to an end, and Russia would gain some territory, and the killing would stop. But so far, the Ukrainians appear to have lost something on the order of 300,000 soldiers, and another 300,000 that are seriously damaged, that are, most of them aren't going to walk again. Some of them are actually samovars, which is what they call seriously injured people. Now, this is a very bad thing. And, it's all the U.S.'s fault. With the U.S. obviously blew up that pipeline between Russia and Germany, and they're getting away with it. Nobody's saying anything. It's amazing. It's like these people aren't just fools that are running the European countries. They're actually criminally stupid.
Right. And I'm sure you saw the town hall with Tucker Carlson and Mike Pence, where he drove home the point that, billions sent to the Ukraine, and yet look at the state of cities across America, Doug.
Yeah, well,
and I live in one of them, which is just getting worse by the second. So
Tucker's not a rocket scientist, but he's almost always on the right side of the barricades. Yet I thought it was wonderful the way he gave Pence an opening to basically blow up his
Campaign.
presidential bid.
I thought we could talk Europe now as a roundup, selfishly because I want to know your thoughts on this. Italy needs migration. This is what Giorgia Meloni is now saying, as she sought to win support from African nations on a plan to curb human trafficking in Europe. She convened a summit of more than 20 nations and top EU officials. I bring this up, Doug, because in the past, and in a now resurfaced video that's gone popular again, she had launched a blistering diatribe saying immigration from Africa would stop if countries like France halted exploitation of continent's valuable resources. And its policy, so she called out France and its policy over its former territory, Burkina Faso, and she suggested France operated a policy which saw it take a huge slice of money made from gold found in its mines worked by children. And in this video, she held up, a photo of a child working the gold mines in Burkina Faso. Does she have a point, Doug?
Look, it was only a century and a half ago that we had children in Western Europe working in cloth mills and refineries and things like that. Children working 12-hour days in factories. Why did they do that? Was it because the employers were evil? No, it was because that's what the children needed to support themselves. The parents couldn't support them. It was a poor society. So the solution to child labor in Africa is to make Africa not a poor society. Well, how do you do that? It's not by government action. It's by getting rid of the government. These governments in Africa are unbelievably, thoroughly, chronically corrupt. Government in Africa is nothing but a means for the people that get in government to steal all they can and put the proceeds in Switzerland to buy chateaux in France. So the solution to the problem isn't by changing the laws and so forth. It's by making it possible for the African. But are the African governments ever going to reform themselves? Because they think politically, and as everywhere in the world, the worst people possible get into governments in Africa to steal as much as they can and get as much personal power as they can. Every damned country in Africa, there are no exceptions. So it's an insoluble problem from that point of view. As far as African immigration to Europe is concerned, I think Orban in Hungary comes as close as anybody to a proper solution to this. The population of Europe is going into collapse. The average woman in the average European country is having like 1.3 babies in her lifetime. So the population is going to drop and continue dropping. So if you need more people, if you can't replace them by robots, who are you going to replace them with? Well, I guess you could say there's nothing wrong with Italy that 50 million Nigerians wouldn't solve, immigration of 50 million Nigerians. But at that point, Italy would be Nigeria, which is to say it would not be Italy anymore. That would cease to exist. And all the problems that you now have in Nigeria would simply migrate north to Italy.
Yeah.
So the problem to the migration problems are, the solution to the migration problems are internal to the countries whose main exports are people. It's a real problem. It really is.
Yeah, it's quite sad, dire to think that poverty will never be resolved in Africa. We could send all the TV
I don't know if you
stars
saw.
and facades and
No, I don't think it will. I don't think it will be resolved in Africa because a while ago I put together a paper with the 12 elements that make Western civilization what it is, which is to say prosperous and free. And frankly, Africa really doesn't have any of these things. They start with freedom of speech, freedom of commerce, scientific thinking. I mean, it's going to take Africa a long time to transform itself to a Western way of thinking. So I'm a big fan of Africa as a place for a young American or Canadian to go to make his fortune, but mainly as a speculator. Business in Africa is all about politics, and politics is not about real production. So Africa's and the population in Africa continues to grow. So Africa is going to be the next big problem
So
on the world's.
when it comes to your investing in mining, do you avoid any miners operating in Africa?
You know, mining has been very good to me, which is kind of amazing because it's really, in today's world, a really stupid business. Finding a gold mine used to be a good thing. Hey, we struck gold, the mother lode, we're going to be zillionaires. It doesn't work that way anymore. You find gold today or any other mineral, it doesn't matter. Your problems have just begun. You're going to be the object of hatred of NGOs and natives and a milk cow for governments, and it's a horrible business to be in, mining generally. So why am I still in it? I own mining stocks today because they're the cheapest class of securities in the world, bar none, in absolute terms and in relative terms. And I think a good case can be made that mining stocks in the pretty near future are going to explode upwards. People have forgotten that since gold was freed in 1971, there have been about 5 major bull markets in small mining stocks that have gone 10 to 1 as a group from top to bottom. And then they generally melt down 95% afterwards, not just 90%. But terrible business, but a great speculation at this time. Where to be? Well, it's better to be in a country where the rule of law and property rights are given as much respect as possible. But actually, in the world, that's no country today. Some are just better than others, frankly, but the rule of law doesn't really exist, and property rights don't really exist anymore today. Not the way they should, anyway. But
So you don't rule out Africa in terms of jurisdictions.
it's all a question of risk reward, cost benefit. So if you can buy a mine in Quebec and one in Africa with the same characteristics exactly at the same price, definitely buy the one in Quebec, not the one in Africa.
Of course.
But if you can get the one in Africa for a 90% discount from what you'd pay in North America, well, you probably want to buy the one in Africa. It's a question of price. It's all a question of price, relative value.
Doug Casey, I always enjoy our talks. Is there anything that keeps you up at night these days? AI, UFOs?
No, I don't let these things keep me up because no, there's nothing I can do about them. There's nothing I can do about them. And in fact, increasingly, we live in our own silos where the information about what's going on in the rest of the world is absorbed electronically. And how much of what you see and hear electronically can you really believe? It could all be a made-up fantasy, one step removed from living in the Matrix, like in the movie. So if you want to maintain some semblance of sanity in your own life, look out for things that you can see, touch, and feel in front of you, as opposed to on a screen. Not to insult our viewers right now, because that's what we're doing, is we're We're adding to the
Except us.
electronic chaos.
Oh.
But the answer to the question is no. I don't worry about these big questions because there's no direct effect I can have on any of them.
Doug, I thank you for your time today. Thank you for enlightening us. Thank you for being you, being true to yourself always. If I could hug you, I would right now. Thank you.
Well, and listen, I second that emotion, Daniela, and you're about my favorite person to talk to on Zoom or whatever we're on right now.
Well, I don't know if anyone could tell me something nicer, that coming from Doug Casey. So, an honor. Thank you, Doug. And thank you all for watching. As always, I appreciate your time. Come back soon to the Daniela Cambone Show. We'll have more great content on our summer series. And don't forget to sign up at danielacambone.com. That's it for me. Thanks for watching.
Opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the contributor and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Stansberry Research, its parent company, or affiliates.